Welcome to Asia Pacific Defense Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. The big thing in the news at the moment, of course, is the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and thank goodness for that. My own view, which I've expressed previously, is that this has gone on for way too long and killed far too many innocent civilians, particularly 15,000 children. And while there is plenty of blame to go around, this latest 2 years spasm of extreme violence was kicked off by the ghastly Hamas terrorist attack of October the 7th, 2023. In more recent times, it looks to me like the government of Israel has completely lost its mind. From the very safe distance of Australia, for some time this has looked nothing like a military operation and far more an attempt to totally destroy Gaza and render it uninhabitable, and the IDF has done quite a good job of that. This has all gone way beyond Israel's right of self-defense. Now, does US President Donald Trump deserves some credit for this? As far as I can tell, absolutely. I'm not sure how he was able to persuade Hamas that Israel can be trusted to honour its end of all of this. I suspect that the mechanism for that was Qatar and maybe Saudi Arabia putting pressure on Hamas, and in turn them putting pressure on Trump, because he finally seems to have lost patience with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and has successfully demanded that the ceaseless bombing of Gaza should stop. As an aside, that's what might be also happening very slightly with regard to Trump's adolescent worshipping of Russia's Vladimir Putin. A very dim light bulb seems to have switched on that possibly the problem has always been Russian aggression. Anyway, I'll come back to President Trump shortly. Now, let's hope the few remaining Israeli hostages, Jewish hostages, are returned and that the ceasefire holds. But previous experience suggests there's only a 50-50 chance of that happening, unfortunately. Now, many things concern me about the entire mess, but top of the list, or close to it, is Israel's complete renunciation of a two-state solution, and at the same time seemingly rushing ahead with the construction of even more illegal settlements on the West Bank. Now, the rumour is that President Trump also stopped Netanyahu short of formally annexing the West Bank, so that's another thing to be grateful for, even though the facts on the ground, as people like to say, are looking very much like annexation by other means. Now, there's also a medium-term problem for Israel, and that will be the existence of a couple of 100,000 totally radicalized Gazans in their teens and early 20s who have experienced 2 years of ceaseless bombardment and by current appearances can only look forward to lives of abject misery and suffering. In these conditions, I assume it will be relatively easy to persuade some of them at some stage to pick up a gun, as they will be motivated by hatred and resentment. The only solution that Israel seems to have in mind is to kill all of them. Now, that might suit some people, but I really don't think it's a sensible or humane way to proceed. The existence of radicalized people, of course, is not confined to the Gaza Strip, and if people have listened to previous podcasts, they will know I've touched on this after my recent visit to Xinjiang, and people can read about that online if they like. As I did my best to explain, China has come up with a successful formula for defeating terrorism, although only time will tell how successful it is, and that formula has involved a lot of stick and now quite a bit of carrot as well. From the extent to which I can make any sense of Israel's strategy, and I'm hesitant even to use that word, it's all stick and absolutely no carrot. When I've spoken with Israeli security experts, and admittedly I haven't done that in detail in the last couple of years, I just haven't had the energy to do it, the approach they speak of very enthusiastically is the need every few years to mow the grass. In quotes, mow the grass. Mowing the grass is a cute way of saying that you base your entire security policy on waiting for the next generation of Gazans or Hezbollah or Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, or whoever you think your enemies are. You wait for them to grow into leadership positions, and then you kill all of them, which Israel, with one of the world's most advanced militaries, continues to do so with stunning effectiveness. The problem with this approach is the fairly obvious one, that it doesn't really solve anything. It just means an endless cycle of killing. As we have occasionally seen in Australia, and thankfully this is rare, some of it even spills over here, and is sort of an ever-present concern for security specialists. Now, I'm not going to hype that up, and that's why I prefer a low-key word, concern, rather than danger or threat. Oh, and I should mention that in all of this, it's not necessarily, ideology. Sometimes issues of mental illness can be involved as well, which makes all of this extremely difficult to combat. Now, we have to have a few words, of course, about the meeting coming up on October 20th between our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and President Donald Trump at the White House. And I'm curious, as I'm sure many people are, as to how that will turn out. Will our Prime Minister attempt some flattery and say that Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize and that it was a tragedy that he missed out? I really hope that we're not going to see any of that. You can't rule it out. Now, there's very credible talk, as I have mentioned several times, of offering the US some sort of rare earths minerals deal, and I go, oh no, not again. It's been around, as I say, for a while, and I'm highly suspicious of this sort of thing for a number of reasons, not the least of which being the legal point that all Australia's resources belong to the people, not to the government of the day. The government is meant to use them for the benefit of all of us, and the theory is that royalties and taxes should be funding roads and schools and all of that sort of good stuff. Of course, where that theory quickly falls apart is that many companies pay no tax, and royalties, which are set by state governments, are often ridiculously low by world standards. And if you want to see a country effectively benefit from resource income, just have a look at Norway. Anyway, I'm sure people are listening, not for my views on energy policy, but on national security. So if our leaders think giving the US some special deal on minerals is going to make us safer, here's an opinion for you. It won't. Ukraine has entered into some sort of deal along those lines, and it hasn't helped them, and it won't help us. Now, the issue has flared up to prominence again because, of course, Donald Trump is now threatening yet another round of tariffs on China, threatening to boost them up to 130%, which is effectively a trade embargo. And this is because Beijing has tightened restrictions about exports of rare earth minerals to the US. Now, looking at it from the Australian perspective, this is another case of failed policy that goes back, a couple of years. There are rare earth minerals everywhere. Some of it is better known as sand, and Australia, because of our extreme geological age, has lots of the stuff. But while China has encouraged the processing of their deposits of rare earth minerals, in Australia, that's just not been a thing. Now, if 20 years ago or 25 years ago, any government, had a policy of encouraging the processing of rare earth minerals here, tax deductions, deferred taxes. If that had happened in the past, we would now be in a position to offer the US something concrete, because we'd have a thriving process industry up and running. Or to put it another way, if an industry had been fostered here, the US would now be buying lots of processed sand from us rather than once again trying to blackmail China into submission, a tactic that will almost certainly fail. But the attempt could once again push the US into recession, and it could take the rest of us down with it. And I'll just say, to be even-handed in all of this, the position of China is that all that they are doing with these increased restrictions is matching the restrictions that the US has imposed on the export of microchips to, guess who? China. Now, the best way to improve our national security is by growing a spine and increasing domestic military production of things such as drones, and not by trying to get ever closer to the US, no matter how ridiculously and dangerously they behave. And I'll elaborate on that in a moment. But to lighten the mood for a moment, Hotel Kingston Friday lunch rumours, a couple of senior defence officials, and I do mean senior, are about to be punted to absolutely top-flight diplomatic positions. I won't name them or where they're going just yet. I just need to do a bit more fact-checking before I go that far. But this seems consistent with what I am more certain about, namely that the government wants to slim down senior leadership ranks, both in the ADF and the civilian bureaucracy. And that, by the way, that slimming down is no bad thing, because as I keep moaning, the defence decision-making process has become more opaque and even less consultative than before, and decisions seem to be being taken on what seem like a mix of agendas rather than a calm and thoughtful long-term approach to budget and acquisition matters. Having said that, there's been a welcome uptick in recruiting. Don't quite know why. It was suggested in Senate estimates that a campaign directed at video gamers as having positive results and making use of things like TikTok. I barely know what TikTok is anyway. Let's hope trend continues. Now, I'm going to come to a really troubling subject, and living and working in Canberra has the advantage that occasionally you just bump into people, politicians and bureaucrats and military figures and academics walking down the street or, in the supermarket or whatever. And it happened last week. I indeed bumped into a person that I will not name, because this was very much a private conversation, but somebody, really at the top of the pile, so to speak. And this off-the-record chat was profoundly depressing, because I should explain to people that national security policy isn't really made by ministers. People might be shocked about that. It's made by a very senior group of very powerful national security experts who have been around for a while, and they have very impressive international links. Occasionally, we get a prime minister who knows a thing or two about foreign policy. People like Malcolm Turnbull and Kevin Rudd spring to mind, but others really couldn't care less, and that's even more the case when it comes to defence ministers. Some of them are really on top of their game, but most are very susceptible to the advice that they get from this particular group of bureaucrats and officials. And roughly speaking, we all know who they are. Unelected governments come and go, but they remain in their offices. And since certainly 2014, I actually think it's a little bit earlier than that, certainly 2014, the litmus test of whether you allowed into this club or whether you remain in it is the core belief that Australia cannot defend itself. That is what they believe, that our population is too small, our economy is insignificant, our land mass is too large, and our exclusive economic zone, likewise, it's just too big. They have concluded that it is an impossible task, and they have persuaded a succession of ministers that is the case as well. Now, once you have established this in the minds of key decision makers as a matter of fact, everything else that you're seeing happen is falling into place. If you start with the premise that Australia just cannot raise enough troops and cannot build enough of our own equipment to defend ourselves, what do? Well, first of all, you outsource all of your security policy to the United States, which is effectively what we have done, and you also basically give up on pursuing any serious form of domestic manufacturing. Yes, you do a bit here and there, but you don't really commit to it very heavily. Again, because it suits the motives of people that we remain a major importer of US hardware. Suits the US as well, I might say. And I know that does sound a little bit conspiracy theorist, but I'm not the first person to mention this and to raise this. There's certainly an awareness in defence industry of how the world works. And it also explains what seems to be a puzzling disconnect between public opinion and the behaviour of government ministers. Public opinions, particularly now that Donald Trump has been president, public opinion shows clearly that Australians want a lot more distance put between ourselves and the US. They want greater self-reliance. They want a far greater independent foreign policy, but that's not happening. And that's the simple reason why. As I've just explained, the policy is not being made by governments. It's not being made individually by ministers coming in and taking charge of the portfolio. It's this group of hardcore US boosters who have concluded that Australia cannot defend ourselves, and therefore we have no choice but to grovel and scrape in front of the US. Now, my conversation with the person in mind took an immediate depressing turn because, of course, I was asked after 5 minutes or 10 minutes of more general chat, the litmus test question. Could we defend ourselves? And the moment that I said the words, yes, but, I was subjected to a bit of, hooting and jeering. And as many of us have realised in life, when people quickly resort to the sort of personal insult line of counter-argument, it's because their own arguments are just not that particularly strong. And if I had been allowed to continue my yes, but line, clearly Australia would have difficulty defending itself from any serious threat at the moment. But this has come about from the last 20 years of deliberate government policy. If a number of different decisions had been taken, say buying the KC-390 from Brazil rather than more C-130Js from the United States, if we had bought the Chunmoo multiple launch rocket system from South Korea rather than HIMARS from the US, if a number of things had happened, and if we had had a consistent approach of trying to maximise Australian industry involvement, the picture would be looking, from a point of view of defence self-reliance, somewhat rather rosier than it is at the moment. And of course, the other thing, because I've heard this line several times from people in this group who sort of instantly say, oh, well, do you want to cut off relations with the US instantly? Where are we going to get our Mark 48 torpedoes from? That's a false premise. Neither I nor anyone I can tell seriously involved in that is recommending that at all. The US remains, for the moment, a security partner. They remain an important source of supply because we've become dependent on them. So I think that what Australia has to do is follow the approach of the Europeans, follow the approach particularly of South Korea, less so Japan, and just make ourselves less dependent over time on the US than we are at the moment. Okay, out of time. Thank you very much for listening. October 20th is not too far away. I'll be looking forward to that with a great deal of interest. See you next time, and goodbye for now.
That's today's Asia Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.